I stayed because my fear was I would have been replaced by somebody even more gung-ho.
Worse.
We started finding these detransitioners because we were initiating these things and then they would never return. And we would go, they never asked for a refill, or where did they go? We found a loss to follow-up rate of about 30%. Some of the horror stories, moms telling us, oh, well, she took the testosterone for a few months, and that's when I finally realized the whole reason why she wanted to start this was she was afraid of getting pregnant. Patients who were telling us, I stopped this. I feel like you gave this to me because I looked the part. I actually have autism. Patients who ended up in the emergency room with real vaginal lacerations that required emergency surgeries. We had a 19-year-old who had her breasts removed. She called the surgeon back 3 months later, begging to have her breasts put back on.
So welcome, Jamie Reed, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, we've known each other for a few years, and everyone in our world knows who you are, but there may be some viewers who've never heard of you. This is their first time coming across you. So let's start. Before we get into, we had an interaction on Twitter, which is the reason why we invited you on the show. But before we go to that, can you just give us your story in a nutshell?
Sure. So I'm an American. I hold a master's of science in clinical research, and I worked in a pediatric transgender center for close to 5 years in Missouri, so middle of the country. Our center opened in 2017, so this was one of the later arrivals on the scene, and it closed by 2024. I worked in the center and became known as one of the public whistleblowers when I filed a formal affidavit with my Missouri Attorney General, laying out in roughly 23 pages all of the concerns, harms, ethical dilemmas, patient stories that I felt like were needing to be investigated. And then that story was picked up by an outlet here called the Free Press. And the story that I published in the Free Press, I hoped a few hundred people would read, and I hoped that I would influence the closure of the gender center where I worked at. And my expectations were met. The piece, I believe, went relatively viral, and I have now been working ever since to essentially close or to get bans initiated in states all across the United States, setting up a nonprofit after I was, like many whistleblowers, basically pushed out of my job.
Could I ask, Jamie, because I know people will be wondering, could you kind of talk about your own background? What was your attitude to LGBTQ, where you came from, so people are very clear about exactly your positioning?
Yes. So I am now in my mid-40s. I came out as a lesbian about the age of 14, mid-90s. I was in and out of the community for most of my life, and I was working in HIV care. So as a clinical case manager in HIV in the late 2000s, about 2015, 2016, when I started to see trans coming in more and more into my clinical case management. So I worked primarily with newly diagnosed young adults and adolescents who are HIV positive, and I was seeing that there was a high propensity for trans identification in that group. I became very interested in this as a subcultural group. I started learning how to assist with legal transitions. I was writing letters for people to be able to use the bathroom of their choice with their employer, working on name change gender markers. I became kind of the trans go-to case manager in the HIV world, and a position opened up in the Pediatric Gender Center, and I received multiple emails saying, this is perfect for you. You need to reach out and apply. Also, at the time, I was in a relationship with a trans-identified woman who was self-identified as a butch lesbian, transitioned as an adult, and has since detransitioned. So I was what, many would say I was a true believer. I believed that WPATH was a professional organization. Before I took the job in the pediatric center, I remember poring over standard of care 7, SS7, and went into this believing that clearly somebody with a pay grade high above mine had figured this out and knew that.
And before we go any further, just want everybody to be very clear. The person, who you had a relationship with was a trans-identified female, people with some say trans man, but didn't detransition prior, like detransition only very recent. I want to make that bit clear if you could. Yeah.
Yes. So the Free Press story came out in 2023. She was still identified as trans, using he, him pronouns. It was about 2 years after that Free Press story that she made the decision on her own to detransition.
So you weren't some sort of relationship embittered and there's a detransition in the background and that's why nothing like that.
When that Free Press story broke, she was absolutely still trans-identified. In our home, I was still using he, him pronouns, was still using the legal name that she had changed to. Yes, was still... and was still saying at that time, too, that adults should have the right to transition, was still holding a viewpoint of support for her transition.
Right. I'm fascinated by this true believer. I love that you said you were the true believer. So this is when you got in. What year did you get into the clinic?
2018.
Right, as just after they opened. Okay, and you're a true believer. How long would you say you remained a true believer? And were there cracks, or was it a sudden moment of something's gone wrong here?
That's an excellent question. There were cracks right from the start. So within 6 months' time, I witnessed a debate between the pediatric endocrinologist and the adolescent medicine doctor. So these were the co-directors of the center. They did not agree what they were treating. So the adolescent medicine doctor believed she was treating a mental health disorder called gender dysphoria that had diagnostic criteria in the DSM, that individuals, in order to receive these treatments, had to meet this diagnostic criteria, and that these interventions would treat and help this mental health condition. The endocrinologist that I worked under was much more in line with the Joanne Olson Kennedys of the world. He basically believed that a trans identity is somehow your soul being released, and that there was no need for clinical distress, that it was simply that if you said you were a trans person, you should have the right to embody that and live that out, and that these interventions were absolutely applicable and great to give, even if you did not even meet the diagnostic criteria laid out in the DSM.
Now, don't want to interrupt or anything, but would you say that, to me, in my mind, that is, they're having a debate, gender dysphoria versus gender incongruence. It's gender incongruence in the World Health Organization's ICD. It's just, you're just trans. You just need medical body modification, whereas gender dysphoria, you need to feel distress because you are trans.
So at the time, I didn't see it as that. At the time, I saw that this is a fledgling new treatment modality in a pediatric setting that did not understand what it was doing. And so to me, I witnessed this debate more as oncology not knowing how to diagnose cancer. And they're giving out something because somebody just says, I have cancer. Remember, I came from HIV. There is this very clear diagnostic worldview where you don't treat, you don't give a medical intervention unless you meet diagnostic criteria. And I was really shocked to see these clinicians basically not agreeing about what they were. To me, I just saw them and I thought, oh, they don't even know what they're, how are they not on the same page about what they're even treating? You don't treat something unless you have a diagnostic pathway and you actually have a condition. To me, I was like, this is sounding more and more outside of medicine, and it seemed like a metaphysical religious debate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is basically
Keep
what it
going.
was. Yeah,
So
keep
what
going.
happened?
I mean,
yeah.
So I felt like at the time, I felt like I was clearly on the side of the adolescent medicine doctor, to the point where I remember there was a statement made where she basically said to the endocrinologist, well, then this is just cosmetic.
Hmm.
And if this is just cosmetic, why are we doing it in pediatrics? Because our patients went down to 3
Wow.
or 4. And so I remember there was some part, there were these two kind of trains of thought I was having. One is, rational medicine, evidence-based, and the other one was just my gut reaction. And my gut kind of just fell out there thinking, they don't know what they're doing.
Wow. And you have children. So
yeah.
presumably, yeah.
Yeah. I have children, but I also worked in medicine long enough. I was a co-located HIV case manager. So yes, many people try to discredit me by basically saying, I'm a glorified secretary. Really what I was a glorified social worker with a strange background, because my background is in anthropology and then clinical research. But I'd always been co-located in doctors' offices. And I love medicine. I'm this strange kid who had a microbiologist as a mom. And I remember even, having getting a sore throat, and she would swab my throat at home for strep, and we would put it on the chocolate agar plate to see what bacteria grew out. And I remember just growing up with this knowledge of you don't treat something unless the treatment lines up with the diagnostics, and that all of it is based on this very concrete concept of medicine.
Wow. And could you tell us a few more kind of scenarios that made you go, what's going on here?
So there was that first kind of fallout. And then as it continued, as I progressed and the years kind of progressed, what I started to see was first the change in the patient cohort presenting. So when I started, I was intaking roughly 4 new patients per month. Most of them were pre-adolescent. A lot of them were boys. A lot of them were kind of the stereotypical, in some distress because their gender was, the way they presented in kindergarten or first or second grade was causing distress for the family. That was the patient cohort. That was 2018. By the time I left, I was intaking 65 new patients per month. 80% of them were girls, and 80% of them were between the age of 15 and 17.
Hmm.
And just from a pure data standpoint, again, just back to the basics of science, something has gone seriously wrong here. And what has happened? You don't see your entire cohort shift so radically. And these girls were not doing well. They were very disturbed young women. They had a host of comorbidities, and everything kept being pointed back towards gender. And the other thing that occurred pretty frequently was that there were a lot of internal debates. This was a multidisciplinary team. So this is often sold as this is the way that you would want to see this work done. So we have a multidisciplinary team, and we would case conference once a week where we would bring forward a challenging case, a questionable case. And what the public and what these parents didn't know was that there were these huge arguments in the background, case after case, where these children, they did not even meet WPATH standards. So I know that for so many of us, WPATH is this completely discredited organization, but where I was working, WPATH was setting the standard of care. And so to have a modality that was reoccurringly going up against its own standards, simple standards, like the patient needed to have had this identity for 6 months and it needed to be consistent, insistent, persistent, real simple standard. Well, I intake a patient, their identity blossomed 2 months ago. I tell the parent on the phone, this really is outside of, they need to have held this identity for 6 months. They show up in clinic and suddenly the story's changed. And now it's been, this has actually been ongoing for 2 years. Okay, but there's no evidence to back that up. And how did the parent's story change? Plus these kind of disagreements were going on weekly on the multidisciplinary team. And at the end of the day, regardless of what the social worker role, the clinical nurse coordinator, or even the psychiatrist sometimes said, the endocrinologist said, oh, no, I'm giving them hormones.
Wow. And was it fractious?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
It was fractious in a way that I now think a lot about group dynamics.
Oh, yeah.
There were these factions to the point where myself and the clinical nurse coordinator started to basically being referred to as the squeaky wheels. We were clogging up the mechanism where the endocrinologist and the endocrinology nurse practitioner and the psychologists were all, oh yeah, everybody just gets hormones. Where it was social work, clinical nurse,
wow,
and then the psychiatrists were the ones who oftentimes were saying they don't meet criteria. Slow down, do something different.
You see, when you think about it, though, multidisciplinary does not work in that setting because they are treating this new type of human being, this transgender person, and you can't investigate because that's transphobic. You can't help them work through it because that's conversion therapy. So if you're in that mindset, everyone else is a problem. Everyone else who is trying to investigate and help these kids, they are going to be the squeaky wheel. They are going to be the problem. So you just have to overrule them.
On that point, you must have realized, wow, I'm in a world here where they see these kids as trans, like as if they're gay, you know what I mean, as an identity. And I didn't know I was in this world. So it must have been difficult on you.
There were a number of times when those little cracks would turn into full-blown, real argumentative debates.
Oh, wow.
To the point where, I know I've said this before, but I was put on what's referred to as a PIP, a performance improvement plan. And what was laid out in that was that I needed to stop questioning the authority of the doctors. And I was not to continue to use phrases, I have concerns about my patient. I have never written the word ethics more in my life than I did. There were email after email. This is an ethical dilemma. This is a concern. This ethic. It was just constant turmoil. And the thing that I find the most disheartening as from an institutional standpoint was the university should not be surprised one bit by that free press story, because there were emails sent to the legal division, to the internal ethics divisions. There were emails sent up the chain from multiple of us over and over and over again saying, this center needs more oversight. This center needs to be reviewed. I demanded an ethics consult for one patient. And when the ethicist came in to the Zoom call with us, I thought we were going to be talking about one patient. As soon as the ethicist understood what we were doing in general, the whole conversation shifted to basically the ethicist questioning the entire paradigm of the whole center itself.
Clinic.
The whole clinic. And was basically, I mean, when the one person in this huge institution whose job it is to be the ethicist basically says, this entire center is an ethical quandary, little old me is basically saying, like, can somebody address this?
But did
Wow.
nothing come of that? The ethicist saying that, did nothing come of that?
It turned into an argument between the ethicist and the endocrinologist.
Because again, like, I assume this ethicist is going on do no harm medical ethics, and the W path and the gender affirming, it's autonomy. Autonomy rules the day, and so those two cannot coexist either. Is that correct?
They cannot, but also what could not coexist is questions around consent and who can provide consent and how is consent ascertained. This was the initial patient that I forced the ethics consult over was a young person who we put a puberty blocker in, who really didn't meet diagnostic criteria, was sort of in that non-binary questioning category. We put a puberty blocker implant in. Parents were divorced, shared joint legal and medical decision making. Puberty blockers in for a number of months. Child tanks, which we saw often, was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Mom finally sends an email and says, and I've now worked with mom post, so I can quote her here. My child is a shell of their former self. They went from being on 1 psychotropic med to 5, and this puberty blocker has to be removed. I demand that it be removed. It is harming my child. Dad was wishy-washy, didn't know. Child was meh. Endocrinologist refused to remove it. To the point where the mom was going to general pediatricians, begging somebody to cut this out of her child's arm.
Oh my God.
He refused.
It's like Black Mirror.
And I demanded an ethics consult on this. And that's when it basically, the ethicist was appalled on some level that we had even put it in the first place.
What happened in the end? Did the kid get it out?
The kid only got it out because I blew the whistle, and the mom sought legal consult and reached out to me post the story breaking. That was the only way that she finally got it removed. And now the child is completely desisted, holds no trans identification, and was seriously being physically harmed by this intervention.
Yeah.
Could you lead up to what made you blow the whistle?
Yeah, what was there one trigger moment?
No. It's difficult. I stayed because my fear was I would have been replaced by somebody even more gung-ho.
Worse. Yeah.
And more on board. We started to get detransitioners. We would either, very rarely did they let us know, very rarely, but we would sometimes find them because the nurse and I were the only ones that really watched these charts from start to finish. So I would intake a patient and I would be watching their chart all the way through. That's what a case manager does. Your doctor, I hate to say this, they don't think about you at all in between when you're in front of them. They don't monitor your case or know what's going on. They see you in outpatient clinic. If you disappear and they never see you again, they forgot all about you. The case manager and the nurse are the ones who refill prescriptions. We're the ones that are supposed to track your case. And so we started finding these detransitioners because we were initiating these things and then they would never return. And we would go, they never asked for a refill, or where did they go? We found a loss to follow-up rate of about 30%. And because I could see you in your chart, and I could see a patient if they came to our clinic, but I could also see if they went to their general pediatrician or did they go to the emergency room for something. I could see across these electronic record platforms, I could see if you moved. I could see if you left our system. These were not kids that were going off to college and getting their hormones now somewhere else. These were truly initiated and stopped because they were still in our system, but they were not continuing these interventions. And sometimes we would reach out and say, are you gonna, like, you started testosterone 4 months ago. You never picked up a refill. What's going on? We were flooded, but sometimes we would reach out and we would hear from a mom, oh, they no longer are on this. Some of the horror stories, moms telling us, oh, well, she took the testosterone for a few months, and that's when I finally realized the whole reason why she wanted to start this was she was afraid of getting pregnant. Like the most bizarre follow-up. Patients who were telling us, I stopped this. I feel like you gave this to me because I looked the part. I actually have autism. I mean, we were finding these detransitioners. And then the story I've told a number of times was there started to be cases of just true, real patient harm. Patients who ended up in the emergency room with real vaginal lacerations that required emergency surgeries. We had a 19-year-old who had her breasts removed. She called the surgeon back 3 months later, begging to have her breasts put back on. The surgeon punted that call, refused to call her back, sent it to myself and the nurse. It was just, I was just appalled at what we were doing. And it got to the point where I left the center, I moved to a different division and really tried to walk away. And I just couldn't.
And so how long from when you left to when you blew the whistle?
Maybe 4 months.
Okay.
And what was the response of your colleagues? Because I often think there's a line in the sand. I wrote an essay recently about, the communist kind of scholar who said, like, the question, when did you know, what did you know and when did you know it? And in the downfall of communism, all the scholars, they knew everything. They knew about the gulags. They knew about it all. And they knew it from the beginning. Essentially, they knew everything. And I don't think this is true for the clinicians. I think they were like you. They walked into what they thought was a decent clinic. And over time, and it depends on your level of, your attitude to authority. It depends on your level of humility. It depends on your level of expertise, your own confidence in your ability to judge any given. So it takes people different levels of time to go, hang on, this isn't okay. It's actually very personality driven, trait wise, if you follow me. And I'm there thinking, that's fair enough. I'd buy all of that. But once somebody blows the whistle and everybody else left there, I'm sorry, I'm all in then, because they are completely, every one of them are complicit.
So I have not had any contact with my former colleagues. The morning of the Free Press story was the final contact I had with the clinical nurse coordinator, who I will say was one of my dearest and closest friends. One of the very last things she said to me was, just get this place shut down. The endocrinologist, again, I think part of what these clinics do, though, is they try to build these teams based on belief. So I was I know part of the reason why I was hired is because I had a trans-identifying spouse. One of the other doctors had a trans-identifying kid. The psychiatrist is a lesbian. The endocrinologist is a gay man. Like, these were belief-built teams just as much as they were skill-based teams. So I do imagine that most of these gender centers in the US that are still open are still belief-based teams. However, I remember a clear conversation with the endocrinologist well before I blew the whistle where I said to him, I said, Chris, we're hurting patients. And he said, yeah, I know, but what do you want me to do about it? And I think what he meant was that, and I think you got at this a little bit, is that the whole mechanism, it's a factory belt. It has to keep turning. A single patient dropped in that doesn't go through breaks the whole machine. If you stop and say no to a patient for this reason, or if you say no to a patient for this reason, it breaks the whole factory mechanism. They all have to go through the same way. And that, to me, is still a major shift from the original clinic. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Dutch Protocol, that was written by a trans-identified woman out of the Netherlands. But The Dutch Approach by Alec Backer.
I've never got my hands on it. Do you have it?
I do. You have to change your country code in Amazon and pay a whole lot of money. But
I've looked at how much it costs in euros, and that's why I've never got my hands on it.
It's very expensive. Okay. But one of the things they admit at the beginning and early in it is they were saying no to a huge number of the adults. They were saying no.
Yeah.
The ones that they suspected as a fetish, they said no. The ones that they suspected, they were saying no.
But I just want to put in here, because people often talk about the Dutch and how ethical they were. They were, of course, I know they had a very strong approach, but people forget that, the Netherlands was the red light capital of the world, and for decades. And then, it so turns out that the adults who were transitioning in the Netherlands, who were mostly male, somehow got it into progressive Holland that there needs to be pediatric transition. We have to see that this fetish issue, they were very, very well aware of, if you follow me, because they've been transitioning people for decades, and they were very aware of the tendency of a lot of trans identified males working in sex work. This was a thing.
To be honest, it was a thing even in pediatric centers. I saw some of our patients moving in that direction. When I say that they said no, I believe at a core who they were saying yes to were the real gender nonconforming homosexuals. So they were like, oh yeah, you're going to pass because you're just clearly gender nonconforming and you're gay and you're going to pass and you're going to do this well. So that's who they were saying yes to. I don't think that there's anyone that's a yes in an ethical, safe manner.
Got it.
And I do recognize that by the time I'm working in a center, it was so broken that everyone was a yes, which to me, when I was still there, was the appalling part, because just from a clinical diagnostic standpoint, even at the rheumatologist's office, there's a whole group of people that come in and say, I think I have this condition. And a whole bunch of the time, the doctors say, no, you don't. You don't have this thing. Gender medicine in the US was so broken. If you were 8 and you said you were trans, or if you were 8 and your mom said you were trans, you were transitioned.
Right. So back to Stella's question then about, well, the point is the what did you know and when did you know it? I love that. By the way, that essay was amazing. The point is, after you blew the whistle, technically that means everyone in your clinic should know. But I'm far more in the everyone should always have known, because it's so clearly mad what was going on. Everyone really should have always known. And if you were able to block it out all that time and do it to all these kids, and the harm is there and visible for you to see, but you still carry on, you've got some kind of really powerful psychological mechanism propelling you on in your quest. You are living, I don't believe, in the same world that the rest of us live in. So you're blowing the whistle. Do you think it even made a dent in the bubble that they live in?
And could I just add one point? You're right, Mia, but specifically the psychologists, shame on them. they should have had some
shame
sort of
on all of
understanding.
them. Let me be clear
know.
before we go into
I
the
know.
next half of the conversation. Shame on all of them, but still.
I want to challenge this premise slightly.
Okay.
Okay, go.
So, medicine does often involve some element of harm to get to benefit. So, an example of this, if you have a blood condition that you're going to die from, but I can possibly get to a cure by obliterating all of your bone marrow, bringing you to the point of death, and then transplanting in new bone marrow with the idea that I will cure you, doctors are very comfortable with walking to that line. They are very comfortable with harming individuals, knowing that the outcome is health. Surgeons every day have to know that. They are going to cut into a physical body and potentially you are causing harm every time you do those things, knowing that the outcome is health. I do believe that many of these gender clinicians bought into the concept that I am doing just that there is an outcome of health.
I believe they think that too, but I think that's they're not in touch with reality, because every situation that you're describing, I assume, means the person has an illness, the person is unwell, the person's health is compromised in some way, and the surgeon or the doctor or whomever with the treatment, they may be causing harm in a quest to heal. Whereas these, in the gender clinic, the kids were always healthy, and so there always needed to be that detachment from reality, because you had to see the trans kid and you had to see the made up suicide risk, you had to see some kind of harm, some kind of illness that wasn't there.
Yes, but these were kids in distress.
Yeah.
A lot of them were truly in pain.
Yeah.
They were identifying their pain. We were allowing the children to make a diagnostic determination about where their pain was centered or the causal position of that pain.
But isn't that mad? Isn't that mad? You let the kids self-diagnose and then you give them the treatment that they say they need? That's mad.
It is mad, but there's a part of I can still put myself back a little bit back in that mindset of seeing that young person come in.
Yeah.
And because especially testosterone has this initial boosting effect. If I am that clinician and see that person come back in 3 months, 6 months, and see that slight mood change, I will say I did not see that with the puberty blockers. I really only saw that is a really harsh intervention that really does cause a lot of, it's not pleasant.
It's awful.
But you can see a little bit of that mood boost from the testosterone.
Yeah.
I completely concur with you now, but there was a part of me that had that veil because part of it comes back to, I trusted somebody understood this, that the evidence showed this. And when you start pulling that piece apart,
there's the chain of trust. And okay, this is going to take us to what I wanted to, our conversation on Twitter and how we set this interview up, because we interviewed Susan Bradley a few months ago, and we released it recently, and she brought puberty blockers to Canada. She was, very, very early in this game, like 1970s. They opened this pediatric gender clinic in Canada. They bring puberty blockers as soon as the Dutch start. And she has since said that it was a terrible mistake. They did terrible harm. Puberty blockers were not what they thought they were. And she has said, we trusted the Dutch. We trusted that they were telling us the truth. When they said it was reversible, we trusted them. And she has had the courage to say that she made a mistake and that she has done harm. And I was really I enjoyed the interview, but I was quite upset that some of my followers commented to say that she belonged in prison because of the harm that she had done. And then just a week later, can you tell me what happened to you on Twitter?
Yeah, it is actually still happening on Instagram to this day. So I went to the there was a day-long event held here in the United States at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a speaking event where there was a whole panel of whistleblowers, and I gave a presentation regarding my complicity in this industry, my complicity in not just the patient harms, but the billing fraud, the diagnostic fraud, all of it. And that video has subsequently gone quite viral. I think it's over 1.5 million views on Instagram alone, and it traveled around X. And I don't look at the comments on Instagram, but I've been told it's half and half. Half of the viewers out of that close to 2 million people, half of them believe that I belong in prison, that I've belonged in prison since the day of my acknowledgement of that they believe I belong in prison. And the other half are arguing essentially that I don't. And a medical doctor on Twitter picked up that video and essentially said, I don't know who this whistleblower is. Although my name was at
He was on Twitter like, I don't know, who is this?
But said I belong in prison. But also, it wasn't just that. It was conflating me to a rapist. That was saying, that basically there's no forgiveness and that every single gender clinician, doctor, what have you, belongs in jail.
Right. And so I messaged you when I saw that because I was horrified, and I, very much in support of you because of the courage that it takes to be a whistleblower. But your reply, I don't know if you want to talk about how you replied.
Yeah.
Your reply to me surprised me. Do you remember what you said?
There are days that I wake up and I believe I belong in prison.
Yeah, that really surprised me. But you thought the surgeons and the endocrinologists should go first?
Yes.
Perhaps.
Yes. There are absolutely days when I believe everyone who participated in this should have some level of accountability. Mm-hmm. That accountability and justice is the demand of the moment.
Wow.
And I disagree. You see, I know that on Twitter every now and again, and it's always when I've been reading phalloplasty literature, I just go on this rant and calling for everyone to be put in prison. And I still hold in my mind, I haven't settled where I am, because I do think anyone who's ever attached an arm flesh appendage to a mentally ill woman's groin probably does belong in prison. There probably is some kind of grievous bodily harm. That is grievous bodily harm. So then it comes down to where do you draw the line? I don't think everyone belongs in prison. And again, like I recommended this book to you in our conversation that we can talk about. And it's written by a journalist, Mark Pendergrast, Memory Warp. And it's about the recovered memory movement. Pendergrast, he was accused of very horrific child sex abuse. His daughter accused him. His daughter was caught up in the madness of the recovered memory movement, had these false memories implanted in her mind, and accused her father. And I believe never retracted. I believe the accusations are still there. And so this man was really injured and really, like, his family was shattered and his life was basically deeply affected by this movement. And yet the conclusion of his book is calling for everyone to not be embittered by a quest for vengeance, not to call for everyone to be in prison, not to seek vengeance, but to actually find peace and forgive and understand that everyone got caught up in something insane. Everyone got caught up in something very powerful. None of those therapists set out to cause harm, to commit evil. They all thought they were uncovering real memories of incest and really helping. And the same thing applies, even though it's hard for us all to accept, but the same thing, does it not apply to gender medicine?
Gender medicine is very akin to the recovered memory movement and the satanic panic in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
Again, there's no more eloquent way to say it. These are batshit crazy concepts that get unleashed and roll out through the public. But part of what I want to see is I don't want 30 years from now, the next version of this to be allowed to just be unleashed. And part of why I do think there has to be I do think we need to seek some level of accountability, if only to put on display a warning for this not to happen again. And so when you look at the satanic panic, when you look at the recovered memory, was there any accountability?
I mean, there was the avalanche of lawsuits and then like psychiatry. I think it was just so embarrassing. They just swept it under the carpet. Like, there's a chilling line at the end of Pendergrass's book where it's basically, we've all said it many times, but if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. The book was published in 2017. Psychiatry was already fully into the next catastrophic tragedy while the book was being published. So we learned nothing. I'm far more like, I definitely, it's hard for me to draw a line. I definitely think every single person involved must lose their license to practice medicine, or whatever license they have. I think they must.
Yeah. I feel that that's a conversation. It reminds me of the North in Ireland and Truth and Reconciliation process, and I saw it in Africa with Nelson Mandela and stuff. I kind of think it's a conversation for the future. I feel like it's a waste of resources focusing on it, if you follow me, because I think, honestly, I'm like, can we fix the problem, and then can we get into the Truth and Reconciliation process that I presume will one day have to unfold? In the meantime, there's a lot to be done. That's how I kind of read it.
Yeah, me too. I think it's an important conversation to have, though, because like the response to your viral video, millions of people and a whole bunch of people saying you belong in prison, that is not going to encourage more whistleblowers. That's not going to encourage any doctor to say, I've made a mistake. It's not going to, I don't think it's going to bring an end. It's going to cause people to dig in and like just become more entrenched and will prolong the harm. I just don't think it's a helpful way to approach it.
There's a lot of elements here. Do I think it encourages more whistleblowers? Absolutely not. Am I at the point in time, though, where at this point, you either had to have been stationed in Antarctica measuring snow for the last 4 years, or you needed to have already spoken up. There's no excuse at this point.
Can you account, Jamie, for the lack of whistleblowers that I thought would come like a train after you?
Yeah, me too.
Oh, part of it is the teams. They were built directly to be belief structured teams. They were hired to be belief teams. There's still a huge swath of our country who doesn't understand that this is based on nothing and this is pure violence and harm to the body. They don't understand that. Um, I don't. Whistleblowing is not fun.
It's
You don't end up.
horrendous.
This is not the grift that people pretend like this is. And then it becomes this really tough thing to talk about because I'm not looking for sympathy, but I don't have a career anymore. 80%, I believe 80% of whistleblowers will go on to never again work in their field. We are not trusted human beings anymore. Who would hire me to work in a hospital? You would have to be, I wouldn't hire me. It's not.
Well, ethicists should hire you.
I'm assuming you've read The Occasional Human Sacrifice by Carl Elliott.
Yeah.
Okay, we all love Carl Elliott because he wrote A New Way to Be Mad in 2000, that Atlantic article about the men who have apotemnophilia, want their legs amputated and stuff. That the title of that book, The Occasional Human Sacrifice, is brilliant to me. I love a good title. And so, we're talking about the people sacrificed.
Sad book.
Oh, it's very sad.
Sorry, you tell everybody,
right.
Yeah.
Well, we're
very
talking, it's about whistleblowers, and it's talking about the victims of medical research and the whistleblowers who expose it. We've got Tuskegee, Willowbrook, we've got a bunch that I'd never heard of as well. But then The Occasional Human Sacrifice, it's the research, it's the people being sacrificed in medical research, but it's also the whistleblower. It is an act of self-sacrifice. You are putting yourself out there, and it is going to be grim. Did you realize how difficult it was going to be when you made that decision?
No, I don't think I was given so much. I was prepared so well. I cannot complain at all about my attorneys or the individuals who walked me through up until that day. But Carl Elliott writes about the whistleblower experience basically in that whatever the first ethical harm is, it doesn't have to be the first public pronouncement. It's the first ethical harm. Becoming a whistleblower is in part because you're participating in or witnessing an ethical catastrophe. And then you have to make a decision, what do I do with this? You are harmed. There's a moral injury right from the start. I experienced a moral injury working in a pediatric gender center. He talks about this as if the whistleblower is in this deep pit, and because he himself was a whistleblower.
Yeah, and it was hard on him.
And many people in our worldview understand what it feels like to have people look at you like you're wearing a tin hat. Yeah. Right? But then to also say, but no, I did this. I was a part of this. I know this from firsthand experience. But when he wrote that whole book about whistleblowers being in this pit, he basically alludes to the idea that you quite possibly never get out of it. And I do think 2.5 years into it, there are days when I wake up and I think, I'm so grateful I'm not in prison, but should I be in prison? And then also, just that pit, I think he's correct. There's going to be an element of that pit I'll just be in it in some way for the rest of my life, because there's so many layers to it. There's not just the institutional capture or the belief. You feel duped. You feel like there are days, that I question my own judgment, that I still, because if my judgment could have been so badly off to not see what was right in front of my eyes at first. It's a challenging thing to live with.
But I don't want to say that you're wrong about your own story, but you really did see quite early on that something was wrong.
Good point. Yeah.
I saw that something was wrong, but it's hard to see. I couldn't put my finger on it. It just seemed like I had this really almost it was like the basic level of science that you teach like first or second graders. It was like it had all been turned upside down, and I could grasp that there was something really off here, but I just couldn't put my finger on it right away.
But that's what Pendergrast is talking about when he concludes his gorgeous book, that everyone involved, the women who accused their parents, the therapists, everyone involved was involved in something massive, something completely insane, this hugely powerful, destructive phenomenon, and everybody got sucked into it and dealt with it in their own way. And that's the way I see you.
Oh,
You were involved in something so much bigger. You read Standards of Care 7 and you thought, somebody's done their research. Somebody, the chain of trust, somebody who wrote this has done all the research, so it has to be legitimate. Like, there's
wow.
so much going on in our culture, the building and building over decades. And then you landed a gender clinic right at the center of it. And it must have been confusing. I find it fascinating that you saw things right away, but the ground has been put like it's shaky
But
ground.
it's almost like if you're a manager, a project manager of a bridge, and you presume that the research is steady, and you got the engineers working on it, and you're the manager of the bridge, but you're just the project manager of the bridge. So you're just getting in the logistics of everybody coming in and all this. And over time, you're going, hang on, there's shaky. Who am I to question all the experts above me? It takes an awful lot of time for it to dawn on you. The bridge has to crack a good few times in a row for you to go, no, this is wrong.
And the tinfoil hat thing, like, I know how completely insane I sound when I do these long, in-depth interviews detailing every step of the way and the fraud and corruption and the ideological capture. Like, it sounds completely insane, but you were dropped right into the middle of that storm. How could you possibly understand it? You don't see anything when you're in the eye of the storm either. So you're just getting glimpses of it and piecing it all together. I don't know, or maybe I'm trying to make you, I came to your defense on Twitter, and I really think people have got to understand how completely insane this cultural moment has been. And then it's, I don't want anyone watching this, though, to think that that means I'm saying everybody is justified and we can forgive them all. Heads should roll, no question. But where do you draw the line? How do we make sure this never happens again? How does everybody be held accountable? That's a very complex question.
Mia, this will happen again and again and again and again.
It will,
As
but
far as I can see.
I
Yeah.
think, of course,
It's
but
just, how do we get out of this as fast as possible is where I'm
how
at.
do we get out of it? And also, I just think this one is so mad. It's such a global tragedy. It's so much harm, and it's so visible,
right.
and the harm is so terrible that if we're going to learn from any of them, this is the one. This is the one we actually learn from.
Two thoughts. First is that there is a group of people who would have read SOC 7 and immediately said, this is not right. There is something wrong with this. And they understood that there's a fundamental, this is not right. I'm fascinated by the people who could have sat in that desk and read SOC 7 and thought, this is not right. And the fact that I sat there and read it and thought, this is so interesting. We're creating, we're early intervening and helping kids. I'm fascinated by the idea that there's two groups of humans that could look at that exact same picture and walk away from it in that exact hugely different ways. And then the second thing, though, is that I think when we talk about the goals or the hope out of our movement, I think one of the things that I'm grounded in is I don't set as my goal just, I want this to stop. I want this pattern of these interventions that are untested and not proven being rolled out through psychology and medicine. I want that pattern to stop. And one of the books that I think about often when I think about stopping that pattern is Rachel Carson's book, A Silent Spring. Her argument is, in terms of the environmental movement, is no chemical company should get to invent some chemical and put it out in the environment and then turn around 20 years later and say, oops, we figured out that it poisoned everybody.
Well,
I want our societal level medical psychological interventions to have to be more like what Rachel Carson was proposing. You don't do anything until you first prove that it has a benefit, that it's safe, that it's efficacious. You can't just say, oh, well, it kind of, I want to flip the whole idea. Psychiatry, medicine should not just be pumping out new drugs and new interventions. I want to change the entire way we kind of formulate the way we move forward so it isn't just a pattern over and over and over again.
We're going to have to kind of close up soon, sadly. Fascinating as it is, I've got another appointment that's kind of leaning in on me. But I am anxious to speak a little bit before we finish, Jamie, because I know you as a lifelong Democrat. I think your credentials on the left are really strong. And, myself and Mia, I think, would have our own fairly strong political credentials. And there's an extraordinary, I think, level of self-censorship on the left on this issue. And I think we've self-strangulated. George Orwell said, the biggest threat would be self-censorship. And I know the two of you are speaking at MCC in Brussels, and I know an awful lot of people on the left, especially in Britain and Europe, are not happy with any sort of connections with MCC. I personally think Frank Furedi is a genius, and he's a big hero of mine. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about this before we finish, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I'm from America, the United States, where our politics are polarized and yet in a very interesting flux, I think, at the moment. The position I have taken truly is that this is my sole issue. This is my driving factor, and I will essentially unite and work with anyone who's willing to tackle this issue, regardless of their political background or stance. And if we disagree on another issue, once this one is resolved, then we can move on to that.
Yeah, I'm very much there as well. Like, I wouldn't say I was overly political before this, but I was a diehard lefty. I always voted Labour. I voted for Trudeau the first time, 2015. I remember driving home from the polling station with my husband and saying, sure, he's an idiot, but how bad could it be? And it turns out pretty bad. But, I voted Trudeau, and I don't have this squeamishness anymore, though, about conservatives and the right. I don't. Kids are having body parts chopped off. They're chopping the healthy breasts off 16-year-old girls. They're inverting the penises of young men who've never even had sex. They come on. So I'm going to a conservative conference, and I'm supposed to feel bad about that. I just don't really understand. And again, single issue. Let's stop this harm. And then if we want to all fight about other things on conservative, liberal values, whatever, then sure, let's do that. But this is a crisis right now, and it's not the time to be in your little camps pointing the finger at somebody because you don't like something they said.
Well, so somebody said to me recently, it was at the GenSpec conference, and it was very interesting insight she gave me. She said, we have to find a way for the left, the Democrats, to come round to this, or it's going to be too bad for the Democrats. And I was like, I don't that's not my positioning. My positioning is we have to stop this dreadful medical scandal. I'm not up at night worrying about how the Democrats are coming out of this. You know what I mean? I'm worried about like the scandal, and after that, like, well, whoever behaved well behaved well.
Wait, hasn't that ship sailed though? I mean, how could the Democrats possibly emerge from this unscathed? They have destroyed the Liberals, the NDP here, Labour, like destroyed their reputation. There's no salvaging that at this point.
Oh, I still have hope that there is.
Salvage their reputation? Absolutely not. Surely not.
I mean, I still have a level of hope in the US that the Democrats as a party will say, we are sorry, we got this wrong. The science, we got this wrong. And we are going to do everything we can to make this right. Do I believe that still that they're going to do that? No, but I do think that level of authenticity and willingness to say that could be a very powerful voting bloc. And I know so many disaffected liberals here who would immediately turn around and come right back to the party.
No, I agree with you there. That would be the way. I don't believe that's going to happen. The way I see it happening is just everybody will be replaced. The hardcore defenders of this will leave, and gradually it'll be a very gradual process. And then they'll pretend it never happened. They'll do their very best to pretend that it never happened and quietly move away. One great big apology. How amazing would that be?
Again, I think that actually not only could it salvage the party, but that shows a level of bravery that people want to vote for.
Of course, of course.
We got this science wrong. And we're going to...
and people love... people love the honesty.
Yes, to make sure
and apologies.
Again. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
My apologies. Twilight has come in, so I've turned into you know the video, the Queen video, Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah. Yes.
I've accidentally turned
up into the darkness.
No, it just came. It's just the darkness has come. But there was just something I wanted to say about that. It's the when I was first involved. Because I'm in Ireland, there's never really been a left-wing party in Ireland. The only left-wing party in Ireland, we've very different politics, and it's been Sinn Féin, which was the Nationalist Party, which was for United Ireland. There wasn't an actual strong left-wing. We never had a strong label, like they'd have 4% of the vote. It's very different than, we're centre. We're centre-left, centre-right, centre-left, centre-right for the last 100 years. And everybody, when I first got involved, I was more speaking a lot with British people, and they all said, stay out of this, you don't understand, this is all about the left, stay away from the Tories, don't go near them, you don't understand this, Stella, stay away from the Tories, this is all about the left, and we have to get the left over. So I listened, being a good kind of humble person, then talking to people from America, stay out of this is all about the Democrats, we got to get the Democrats. And I remember being in these private groups that all pleaded with everybody to vote Democrat for 2020. We needed to get Biden in. We needed the Democrats in. They would stop the polarization. I saw it all, and me looking agog going, wow, this seems wild to me, but I'm not American, whatever. Very open. And then 2024, loads of them have swung out of that. And loads of them were saying, no, we're voting Trump. And there's diehards still saying, no, you cannot vote. You have to vote. And it just seems like they're shooting themselves in the foot. I really think there's a tribalism among these diehard leftists that they don't see that they're just being completely tribal.
There's one element that I always draw back on my anarchist roots, which to me is, it really doesn't matter who the president is in the US in some ways. A lot of our politics are local in ways that are very important. And so as much as I appreciate Trump's executive orders and believe that he has done immeasurable things to stop this harm here, my local school district will not be changed in any way by what happens at the federal level. The only way to get gender ideology out of my local school district is for me to step up and get gender ideology out of my local school district. And so as much as I see people arguing over which party they voted for the presidential, the actual work every day to change this in the US is going to come down to every single school district is going to have a parent step up and fight to get this ideology out of their district. And then every single state is going to have to enact a ban. And so that is why I still, the org I run is completely bipartisan, and we see this as a state by state. Sometimes we call it a slog, that we are kind of dragging ourselves all the way around this country. But the federal government can only get us so far. We have to get this
That's
ideology
very
out
interesting.
at the root. It's like a poison ivy. The federal government can come in and spray from a giant plane, but if that root is not pulled out all the way down and dug completely out, it's just going to pop back up again.
Well, yeah, it's like Japanese knotweed. But we better finish. Thank you, Jamie. Tell people where to find you, where to donate, where to, support your work, and then we're
On
closing up.
X, if you would like to say that I belong in prison, I am at Jamie Whistle. I run an org called the LGBT Courage Coalition. We have a website. We also are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. And we kind of have a similar-ish podcast where we do a local news, a weekly news roundup on informed dissent. You all you get this huge historical overview and help us understand this. And then we're trying to do the week to week what's going on. So
Great.
Excellent. Informed dissent. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you,
Thank
Jamie.
you for blowing the whistle. It was very brave
Yes.
of you. Thank you.